Good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Spar Scene MMA podcast. We are here once again to eat crow, also to wrap up the main event specifically of UFC 293 in Australia. Now, I would love to know what kind of time machine Brad has because apparently he had the call for the main event that nobody else had. He goes, "Can you picture it now? Sean's got Izzy backed up against the fence. He's dazed. Meanwhile, I'm watching the fight, and that happens in the first
I
round.
know.
Brad, how'd you do it? How'd you
Jeez,
call
it's
it?"
just it reads. I mean, the guy's he's crazy, man. He's a maniac, and I figured there's no way he was gonna take a step back in this fight. And Izzy hasn't fought a guy that's done that before. He likes to fight where he has space. He can point strike and just and be fancy with it. Well, he couldn't really be fancy with it when Sean's like a foot away from him. He's throwing jabs left and right. But Sean's defense was excellent. That was the thing that stood out to me the most was his defense. And I think that comes from all the sparring he does. I think he's just been in there so many times, he just knows how to fight.
I also heard a rumor that if you went into the back of the auditorium where the fights were taking place, Alex Pereira was controlling Sean Strickland with a PS5 controller. Now that's unverified,
Yeah.
but speaking of which, he did go and train with Pereira for a little while. And what's interesting after he, got knocked out by Alex, Pereira was kind enough to kind of point out that he had a tendency that when he would go to the body, his hand would come up and kind of paw it and go down here and open it up for a left hook up top. That's the only times that Strickland's ever been finished is left hook up top. Also, I think a spinning wheel kick to the head at that same open side. What's interesting, it seems like he shored up that hole in the defense. And here you could see Izzy was kind of probing for a left high kick. He wanted that open side. Wasn't there. Elbow was there every time. Eric Nixick did a wonderful job prepping for Izzy. Honestly, I think we underrated how big of a role the stance and the open stance matchup would be. It was incredible.
Yeah. I think the craziest thing about this too is he won just doing the basic fundamentals of MMA. Like this is kind of like obviously a newer sport, but if you want to know what the fundamentals of MMA striking is, just watch Sean Strickland. Like that was a master class last night. He pretty much won off defense and a 1-2, and a jab. Like that's pretty much how he won the fight. And not only did he back him up against the cage just in that first round, I mean it was the whole fight. Izzy kept trying to circle out. Boom. Sean was like right into his face. So, yeah, any up and coming MMA guys, they want to learn some striking. I would watch Sean, man. That was just basic fundamentals, man.
Yeah,
He weaponized pressure.
I wouldn't recommend taking too much advice from Sean Strickland, but
Yeah. inside the ring, you can take some advice.
Right.
like he said,
There's
Even
no
like-
life or relationship advice.
Yeah, and like the bad call I made last week, I thought the leg kicks would get to Sean, but he predicted them so perfectly. Like he didn't check all of them. He took a couple of them, but even when you could tell he knew when they were coming, like from miles away. I thought that was really interesting because I thought that was going to be what got Sean out, what got Sean away from Izzy. Like how Izzy would kind of close the gap on that, but.
how much do you think that first round where he had Izzy, on the fence a little bit, and I'm glad they didn't stop the fight, by the way. That was a great referee job there,
Yeah.
by just keeping it going. How much do you think that moment changed the rest of the fight for Izzy?
Big time, because honestly, watching the rest of the fight, it didn't seem like the guy that I'm used to watching. Not making excuses at all, because guess what? Sean made that happen. He forced that to happen. There's kind of a narrative going out there, maybe that Izzy wasn't 100%, maybe he was injured. You saw Dana this morning. He was like, oh, he was bone dry before the fight. He seemed a little bit flat. I don't know. I think there was an element of maybe not taking Sean seriously enough. And I think when that bit him with that right hand, it seemed like maybe he was out on his feet for the remainder of the fight. I hate to say it. He seemed very out of it. His decisions, the pop on his shots, even when he did connect, it wasn't something that was moving Sean. So it seemed like he was kind of a little bit of a ghost for the remainder of the fight. I wonder from here, some people were saying Dana looked really upset. putting the championship belt on Sean. I sometimes wonder why, because I feel like he's good for business. Am I off base?
I think he's good for business, but I think he's risky for business. I think he's
Mm.
good because he gets a lot of attention, but it's not necessarily good attention. And there's always a risk that he's going to say something out of pocket because he has absolutely zero filter. So I think that's the thing he's worried about. But I'm curious who's more upset, the people who put Izzy in all their parlays or Dana White by giving Sean the belt?
Or what about the guy who put $220,000 on Izzy just to win like 30K? They showed it during the fight in
Oh
the quarter.
no. Was it Drake?
Well, Drake put 500K on Izzy.
And see by KO.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I
incredible.
mean, I think too, like with the UFC becoming a little more corporate, like it definitely is an issue with Sean for PR and purposes. But I think Dana was more just disappointed by putting Izzy as the headliner in Australia. Sean was set up to lose this fight, man. It was a somewhat short notice, but I don't know why he'd be too mad. But I think it is mostly the PR reasons.
Mm.
It was a lot of
And at
interesting
this
things
point,
on the mic. All those
Yeah,
swears and
slurs.
post-fight slurs. Yeah, it was interesting. I don't think Dana's too
it
bothered
was a
by
tough
that. He
night.
didn't, see, he didn't seem too bothered in the press conference afterwards. He just said they all apologize or whatever, but they're going to do what they want to do. They're grown men, and yeah, I think it's all good.
Emotions get heated. I even saw, one of the fights from the prelims that Radke had a little moment where he dropped a slur on the mic. And,
He went off.
I'm sure the whole booth is, having a freak out in these moments, like with Manel Kopp has his freakouts constantly. And, man, they might need to implement a tape delay pretty soon if they're not careful. Try to get these edits out.
My,
Now, at this point, I wonder, do we get a DDP versus Sean Strickland match? Do we get an immediate rematch? Seems like Dana's leading towards immediate rematch, which might be a little hard to justify when we got 2 losses out of 4 title fights.
yeah, I wasn't super surprised when Dana said he wanted a rematch, especially with Izzy being, a one of the biggest stars. He's gonna get some favoritism, but I just don't. Even if you're an Izzy fan, I don't know if you really want to see him do a rematch. I don't know. He fights. I watched the post fight interview and Eugene Behrman, the CKB head coach. He's like, I'm totally down for a rematch. I'll do it next weekend. It's like, dude, man, I don't know.
I think Izzy has all these fights, and he's not necessarily training to improve his game. He's more so training to beat these opponents that he has lined up. Because he's fighting, like 3 times a year? I would say somewhere around that range. And I think it's just kind of, people are figuring him out. Once you lose once, people kind of catch on to what's beating you, and they go after it. But what's interesting is Sean Strickland beat Brendan Allen. I think it was like 2 years ago, somewhere around then. Now Brendan Allen's on the up and coming. So yeah, you have Dricus du Plessis, you have Jared Cannonier, who weighed in this past weekend, and then you have Chimaev, who's fighting Costa soon. So there's like so many guys that are wanting a shot at the belt. So maybe it's going to be rotating around a little bit. I don't think we'll have a contender that'll technically be there for years like Izzy was. I think it'll be moving around, kind of like light heavyweight division with Jamal Hill, Yuri Prochazka. I think we'll see that in the middleweight division as well because there's so many people that are contenders that are so good and so dangerous that anyone can win at any time.
Exciting when there's a sea change in a division because bottom line, we can now look at these upcoming matchups with a different perspective, like Holland versus Della Magdalena at the following pay-per-view. That's a fight that now you go, all right, these 2 guys are surging contenders. I know we hate to kill a contender. And the matchmakers, sometimes you'll watch, they're careful the way they match guys up on the come up, especially when they're undefeated or they got a really good streak. Holland doesn't really have that problem, man. He's so active. He's willing to fight all the time. He's got losses, plenty of them, but we could see maybe he could have a nice little run at the weight class too. I got to say, though, just one thing for Izzy's sake. We got to give this guy respect for being one of the most active champions because a lot of guys, man, they get that title and injuries, just the demands of the sport, the PR, everything. You see them sometimes fight once a year, if that.
Yeah.
Especially a heavyweight. These guys disappear. You said that the other day, Brad. It's like, where are these guys? And it's one of those things where at this point, you got to give credit to the fact that he was fighting 3 times a year, that he was wiping out the division multiple laps. He went back and avenged his loss. He's got nothing to hang his head on here. I think he got figured out. It's time to evolve.
Yeah. So who would you like Izzy to fight next?
Catchweight Stephen Wonderboy Thompson.
Ooh.
That's an interesting one.
Fun fights. I want fun fights.
Yeah, I don't think Stephen Thompson will take that fight. He's a picky guy, man. He turns down a lot of fights. Maybe this is something he would take, though. Even though they have like a weight class apart, I still think he would take it, like a catchweight, like you said. But I don't know. I mean, Izzy has that massive contract with the UFC. So I don't know how they would put that into play, and maybe they would change things a little bit just to give him big fights that'll make a lot of money for the sport, for the company. But I could see him fighting Duplessis, to be honest with you. I think they'll do Cannonier and Strickland, and then just do Duplessis Adesanya to get a shot at the belt. Just because of the beats that they have together, it'll sell more. And it could be, I guess you could say a co-main for a pay-per-view. Not necessarily a pay-per-view fight because it's not a title fight. But I could see that fight happening for sure with Duplessis and Adesanya.
Yeah. I think the realistic option is probably the winner of Paulo Costa and Hazmat. I think that's a more realistic fight. But you never know what's going to happen with injuries. I think what Brad said, I think DDP is probably the best fight for Izzy. But the problem is they already promised DDP the championship fight with Izzy until he had to pull out. So you already promised this guy the championship fight. He's going to have to probably fight Strickland. So based off like the UFC standards, I would say DDP and Sean Strickland would probably be the next matchup. And then Izzy fights the winner of Hazmat and Paulo Costa. But you never know. I feel like Izzy probably wants DDP more than he would want. Because I think Cosmo's going to win that fight, and I don't think you want that fight as a comeback fight.
He's not going to.
So that's the big issue. Yeah. and the problem is DDP's like, I'm not going to fight Izzy. You guys already told me that I was going to get the championship fight. So it's like this weird little, and so I don't know.
Do what you're
That's
told.
going to be interesting. Yeah.
Do what you're told. Nah, they're not going to.
I can't help but feel.
Yeah.
No way. The what?
Izzy fights Chimaev.
Oh.
As a comeback fight after a loss to Sean Strickland, that's literally a nightmare for Izzy. That's what he's literally when he goes to bed at night, that's his nightmare right there. Losing to Sean Strickland, then having a comeback fight against Hazmat. And like I said, I love Izzy. I mean, he does some weird things outside the the cage, but I don't. If I'm an Izzy fan, I don't want that.
It's like reminds me of Usman.
I can't help but feel.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Chimaev, I think he's the future champ, but
Me too.
I can't confirm it because I don't know whether the wheels came off. Something's up with him. After that Gilbert fight, we've seen, the Holland fight, which was really, really quick. That whole weekend was a fiasco. And I know they kind of sent him to the back of the line because of the way the weight miss thing went and the Nate fight. It's just hard to tell with him. I wonder, is he really that guy, or is he taking so much damage that he's going to have a short career from that kind of berserker mode?
Well, the problem is we haven't seen him fight in like over a year.
It's because they're trying to put Usman against Chimaev, I think, but I don't think they wanted that fight to happen. But Usman, he loses to Leon Edwards, and then rematches, loses again, and now he's like nowhere to be found. So
Usman?
it's like, yeah. So all these African champions we had, now they're all gone. It's weird. It happens that fast.
It's crazy.
Yeah. You go from being on top of the world to, getting beat once or twice and then start falling apart.
It's brutal. The sport passes people by, and people's careers are not the way they are in other sports. It's crazy. It evolves too quickly.
Yeah.
Can't get too emotionally attached.
Yeah.
I feel like the best, one of the best parts of the UFC is it's always like what's next. Like there's always something next.
Yeah.
you don't have to wait like an off season for something. But that's also one of the things that annoys me sometimes. It's like, man, just let them enjoy the win, you know, like what's next? It's like, come on, man, like it's always like what's next. So I feel like I have a little issue with that, but it's also what makes the UFC fun. You don't have to wait forever to get results. So
It's not like boxing where people imagine Floyd and Manny for years, and then a decade later it finally happens and it's a snooze fest. It's like they sucked the love out of it. Speaking about what's next, guys, next weekend we've got a big fight, Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso, a rematch for the women's 125-pound title. We will be back with some analysis for that fight and some other key fights off that card. We hope you all enjoy watching this video as much as we enjoyed making it.